I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views.
Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Independent media matters, and your support makes it possible. If Parallax Views has challenged your thinking, exposed you to new ideas, or simply kept you company on your commute, now's the time to help sustain it. Listen, share, and if you can, support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. If you want, you can also make a one-time donation by contacting me at parallaxviewspod@protonmail.com. I can give you a link to my PayPal page if you contact me that way. Let's show what listener-supported media can do. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Sorry for my absence the last week, but I had some listeners that weren't able to keep up with all the shows I was releasing in the past month, and along with that, I was getting a little bit of a social media fatigue, and I needed a bit of a reprieve from the internet. So, I took a break. Now I'm back in action with an interview I recorded last month with Daniel Lazare, author of The Frozen Republic, How the Constitution is Paralyzing Democracy. A while back, Daniel wrote a piece for the website Permanent Revolution entitled Why Trump is Not a Fascist and Why It Matters. I know that title will be provocative for many of my listeners, but I thought Daniel had something to say, and whether you agree or disagree with him on whether Trump is a fascist or not, his piece does make an important contribution in the sense that Trump is not some alien threat from the outside, as, say, figures like Liz Cheney want to portray him as, at least not in Lazare's telling. Rather, Trump is American-made. Trumpism is American-made and should not be seen as something alien. If Lazare is right about that, what are the implications? Well, that's going to be something I want you to think about during this conversation, and it's a fascinating one. So, without any further ado, let's get right to it with Daniel Lazare. Oh, also, I almost forgot before we get started, I should note that Daniel was outside during this conversation. You may hear some background noise, especially at the beginning, but I hope you will still find it eminently listenable. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very happy to have on. He was recommended to me some years back by Noam Chomsky when I had Noam on the show for his book, The Frozen Republic, which deals with the U.S. Constitution and how it may be paralyzing our society in some ways. My guest is Daniel Lazare, and we're going to be talking about an article he wrote for Permanent Revolution entitled Why Trump is Not a Fascist and Why It Matters. And I know some people are going to find that title provocative, but I think people should actually read the entire essay before making any conclusions, because there's a lot to chew on with this essay. I was curious, what's the response been to it so far?
It's been good, actually. This guy's getting a lot of reads. Most of the comments has been favorable. And I'm pleased with the reaction.
I guess for me, and I said this to you in our email correspondence, in some ways I find the initial question that you ask, is Trump a fascist? And you would answer no. That to me is less interesting than the second idea you present, which is that instead of being a fascist, Trump is rather a symptom of a collapsing liberal order. So maybe you can explain to my listeners what that means. What does this collapsing liberal order mean? How is he a symptom of it?
Okay. I mean, first of all, fascism originally rose in in Italy and Germany and a few other places. In Italy, immediately after World War I, when Italy was really gripped by a revolutionary crisis. And Mussolini's black shirts crushed that revolutionary uprising. And the uprising was widespread and intense. I mean, hundreds of plant occupations occurred in the industrial triangle of Turin and Genoa in northwestern Italy. And the Po Valley was seized by farm workers for a period of months. But Mussolini's black shirts went in and crushed those uprisings, and a movement was then born. And of course, in Germany, the Nazi movement started around the same time. It launched an attempted coup in 1923, and then was finally victorious in 1929 to 33, when the German economy absolutely collapsed, and support was growing for the German Communist Party to the point where it seemed like a communist takeover was certainly a possibility. Certainly, the right wing was terrified by that prospect. But what I mean by liberal collapse in the U.S. is that what we've seen in the United States and the broader West has been the opposite since the 1970s. I mean, rather than a revolutionary upsurge, by any measurement, working class resistance has collapsed. I mean, the number of strikes is a fraction of what it was a half century ago. Working class parties, from the mildest social democrats through to the fiercest revolutionary communists, are a shadow of their former selves, and the so-called worker states, the term that Trotskyist prefers as degenerated or deformed worker states, have virtually all collapsed or have been bourgeoisified from within. So rather than a working class upsurge, what we've seen is the exact opposite, an across the board working class collapse. And now we're seeing the next stage, which is a liberal collapse. I mean, the parties of the liberal center, ranging from the social democrats, to the mild conservatives, are all on the run across the world. I mean, the Democratic Party here in the U.S. is in a state of collapse. I mean, as bad as Trump's poll numbers are actually holding up, but the Democratic Party's poll numbers are scraping rock bottom. But that's true for Macron in France, Sir Keir Starmer in Britain, the Traffic Light Coalition in Germany, etc. They're all on the run. They're all collapsing. They're all loathed by the broad population. They have nothing to say. Their political message has run out of steam. They're deeply unpopular. And we're just seeing an across-the-board collapse. And by the way, that also applies to institutions like the EU and NATO as well, which are in disarray. So this is the complete opposite of what we saw in Italy in the early 20s or in Germany in the early 30s, the diametric opposite. So that's why the fascism label seems to be inapplicable at this point. And the liberal collapse is like, it's not so much that Trump has won here in the US, it's that the Democrats have lost. I mean, the Democrats spent 8 years trying to keep Trump out of office or defeat him. They used Russiagate in 2017 to 2020. They used a series of criminal prosecutions after Trump left office in January 2021. Some of the cases were strong, but some were really, really weak. And now, and they all failed. I mean, Trump, the harder the Democrats tried, the stronger Trump became, and the weaker they turned out to be. So I just think it's I think that it's a liberal collapse that really is a source of the problem, and that now that the left has been torn out by its roots. Political discontent is now flowing to the radical right. So I think the dynamics are really very different than they were in the 20s and 30s.
I also wanted to ask, what do you think are the causes of the collapsing of that liberal order that you're speaking about?
Well,
And
I
I
think
want to
it's,
note for
yeah,
my listeners, you're outside right now, so if people are hearing background noise, it's
yeah. Sorry. Is it bad? Is the background noise okay? Or, I mean, is it disturbing?
I can hear a lot of chatter in the background, but
Yeah. Should I move to a less populated spot?
if that would be okay with you.
Yeah. It's the Columbia campus, and kids are milling about and chattering
That's much better,
as kids
actually.
as kids tend to do. Okay. Anyway, so what's caused it is an economic slowdown, uh, a general across the board economic slowdown, which has occurred over a span of better than 50 years. I mean, growth is just down severely, especially compared to the golden age of 1948 to 1948 to 72 or 73. And that, of course, is the prime driver. But we've also seen a collapse, which is related to all this, a collapse of political institutions. I mean, U.S. government, Capitol Hill, has been gridlocked for a generation. I mean, there's been a non-shooting civil war on Capitol Hill since the 1990s. Um, uh, uh, Partisan conflict has reached poisonous levels. It's unresolvable. Uh, the government is frozen. The presidency has been stolen twice by virtue of the electoral college, and people are angry and frustrated and depressed. And this is leading them to give up on the center, to give up in disgust on the center, and to seek solutions in what was formerly the margins. And this means the right-wing margins. So the right-wing margin is now becoming the mainstream, thanks to Trump and others. Thanks to Trump, but also thanks to Meloni in Italy, Marine Le Pen in France, and numerous others.
If you could, with regards to the sort of disillusionment that people have with liberalism, maybe what is this disillusionment that people have with it? Because I think one of the things that really informs liberalism, and I'm talking about liberalism as a long-running tradition, not as just Democrat, but I think one of the big core tenets of liberalism is this belief in proceduralism. And I think increasingly we see a turn away from that proceduralism, especially with Trump. Do you think that's a big part of this, or?
Oh, it is. But the trouble is the procedures themselves are so unwieldy and so undemocratic. I mean, one problem that, of course, the big problem has not only been the economic slowdown, but economic polarization as well, and that has been a huge factor. Uh, uh, I mean, the growth of income and inequality since the early 70s has been extraordinary, and this has totally changed the nature of politics in the so-called democratic left, democratic West, um, and uh, and it's been especially damaging for liberals because liberal Democrats tend to be in the better off portion of the population. That's the great change. In the 30s, the Democrats were the party of the working class to a certain degree. They weren't a working class party, but their members were heavily, concentrated among blue collar workers, whereas Republicans tended to be richer. But now it's the exact reverse. And so, as Democrats, as their fortunes rose relative to the general population, they also made the mistake of adopting a highly moralistic policies, which had the effect of just alienating vast sectors of the working class and opening the door up to Trump.
I want to come back to that. You said that the sort of proceduralism that informs liberalism has become unwieldy. I think this will get us into a conversation about your book, which I actually ordered a copy recently, but it hasn't come in the mail yet. The Frozen Republic. I know a lot of people will find that provocative because you're sort of taking aim at the undemocratic elements of the U.S. Constitution. How do you see this as tying in to the Trump presidency?
Well, the Constitution is highly undemocratic, and it's breaking down. The I mean, this is a document dating from the pre-democratic era. It's America is the last ancien regime on Earth, with the partial exception of Great Britain. But it dates from before the French Revolution, which marked the start of the age of democracy. So it's a document. It's 238 years old at this point. It dates from the age of slavery, breech-loading muskets, silk knee breeches, powdered wigs, et cetera, et cetera. And it's rife with inequality. Uh, the Senate, for example, is based on equal state representation, even though the population ratio between the states is as much as, I think it's 68 or 69 to 1. So therefore, a majority of the population, 54%, lives in just 10 states that are outvoted 4 to 1 by the minority in the other 40. Republicans have a 53-seat majority in the Senate, but they actually represent about 48% of the population. The House is grossly gerrymandered. The Electoral College is biased towards lily white rural states like Wyoming, the Dakotas, Vermont, etc. And the Supreme Court, which is a joint product of the Senate and the Electoral College via the presidency, is now this overpowering right-wing dictatorship, which is busily stripping rights away that Americans have enjoyed for decades. Abortion, the most notable example. But the important thing is the Supreme Court is completely unaccountable to the broad public. The current 6-3 right-wing lineup will likely persist well into the 2030s, and there's nothing that we the people can do about it. I mean, it's a right-wing dictatorship that has another dozen years to run, possibly. Mussolini's reign lasted 21 years. Hitler's lasted 12. But this constitutional dictatorship has lasted for more than 2 centuries, and could well, as things stand now, could well go on centuries longer. And absolute worst of all is the amending clause in Article 5, and that is the key to the whole story. Most people are not aware of it, but this is the key problem facing the U.S. today. The amending clause is the clause that says that in order to change the Constitution, you need 2/3 of both houses plus 3/4 of the states. And 3/4 of the states means that 13 states can veto any attempt at constitutional reform. And 13 states can be as little as 4.4% of the US population. So the Constitution is unchangeable. And it's getting worse, yet there's nothing that can be done. The situation is absurd, but it's also explosive. Because what it means essentially is Americans are captives of a political system over which they have no control. The Constitution, it's estimated that 160,000 Americans took part in the ratification conventions of 1787 to 1788. And that was about 4% of the US population at the time. They were, as far as we know, they were all white male property owners. So so the Constitution as a whole, so that's, as a whole, has never been democratically ratified according to the modern understanding of democracy. I mean, obviously, a vote that's limited to white male property owners is not democratic. So the Constitution has never been democratically ratified, and its situation is getting worse and worse and worse. Yet Americans are paralyzed. There's nothing they can do, and the results are deadly, absolutely deadly.
I'm sure you've talked about this with many other people. I feel like whenever you make a critique of the Constitution or the founding fathers, even if you say, well, they were white male property owners, they created a system that was meant to benefit them. Uh, I think some people will just shut down because it's like, oh my God, you're attacking the sacred cow. So I guess for you, what's the best way to sort of have this conversation and get people thinking about the Constitution is not just having bugs in it, but maybe the bugs are actually features. Some of the problems.
They are features, and the entire worldview is upside down. I mean, suddenly Americans think of their mission in life as somehow fulfilling a plan set forth by the founders um, nearly 2.5 centuries ago. So our duty is to them. And by the way, I mean, I don't, I'm not saying the founders, were bad. I mean, by the standards of the day, they actually may have been fairly progressive, but I think 40% of them were slave owners. The rest were from the economic elite. And just this is just like a extremely biased upper class view, but our loyalty is not to them. I mean, our obligation is not to fulfill the blueprint they laid out. Our obligation is to ourselves, and we, the living, are the ones who count. We have got to take responsibility for the fate of our society, to make it better for us and to make it better for our progeny, but only we who can judge, how to do that. The founders can't do that because, I mean, obviously they lived in a radically different time. They had no way of predicting what society would be like, 2.5 centuries later, obviously. And it's just absurd to ascribe these superhuman powers to a bunch of mortal beings, mortal like the rest of us. When we have elections, only the living vote. I think it's not since the days of Mayor Daley in Cook County that the cemeteries voted. So our fate is in our hands and should be in our hands, and we should make sure that it is in our hands.
One of the interesting lines in your essay for Permanent Revolution was, it is a matter of using the authoritarian aspects of the Constitution to eliminate the few remaining democratic vestiges. That's what you're saying Trump is doing. So what are those democratic vestiges, and how is he using the authoritarian aspects of the Constitution to eliminate those?
Well, first of all, if it wasn't for the Electoral College, Trump wouldn't be here. I mean, he would have lost in 2016. He would have lost again in 2020. And therefore, chances are very slim he would have gotten a third try in 2024. So we would have no Trump if it wasn't for the Constitution. And secondly, Trump arises out of the imperial presidency. And the imperial presidency has been on the march since at least FDR. But it certainly has been the case since World War II, and most especially the case since 2001. I mean, 2001, inaugurated a permanent state of war. And so we've had a we've had a warfare presidency ever since, and that has led to a giant growth of power by the executive branch. And so that is what is fueling Trump. I mean, that's what he arose out of. So one reason I don't like the fascism label is that people who use it are like, Joe Biden uses it, Kamala Harris uses it, Liz Cheney uses it. And the reason they use it is they use it in order to portray Trump as un-American. In other words, an alien, an evil alien outside force, foisted on an otherwise perfect United States.
But you're saying the reality is he's American made.
Yes, the reality is that America is not perfect. America is a society in crisis, a crisis that Biden, Harris, and Cheney all deny, and that we've got to see Trump as a product of a crisis which is made at home. And that the solution to Trumpism is not to turn the clock back to 2023 when we had a semi-comatose president in the Oval Office, but to create a new structure which is truly democratic. And that is the only solution. We've got to deal with the crisis in the US, and we've got to tackle it and solve it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think you also write liberals will thunder that Trump hates the Constitution. But you're saying his aim is not to overthrow America's holy of holies so much as to use the imperial presidency, which that imperial presidency was made possible by the constitutional order. And I want to delve into that more because I think a lot of history gets glossed over. You mentioned the imperial presidency. I'm a big fan of a lot of Gore Vidal's writing, the narratives of empire cycle. And that was very influential to me because he sort of made me think about this idea of how the National Security Act brought us closer to the imperial presidency. And it's been a long march towards that, and it just got accelerated in the early 2000s with the global war on terror. And I feel like all of this is glossed over by the sort of Liz Cheneys of the world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the imperial presidency is a product of the permanent war state. It was so when Trump launched his air war on Iran, all these Democrats accused him of violating the Constitution. Well, they didn't accuse Obama of violating the Constitution when he was droning people in 7 Muslim majority countries, having weekly meetings, weekly assassination meetings on who to attack next. I mean, they didn't complain when Hillary Clinton launched an air war against Libya, or when she started fueling a proxy war in Syria, or backing the Saudi air war against Yemen. They didn't, no Democrats complained at all. So they're happy to see presidents appropriate war powers when it's their president, and then they hide behind the Constitution when the other party does it. That's why checks and balances work. When checks and balances work in your favor, they're just great. They're just constitutional. And when the other side
real quick, not to interrupt you, but it's sort of like one thing I've been thinking about lately is people say this is unprecedented what Trump is doing with bombing Iran, and I'm like, well, was it unprecedented when Obama killed an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki? I mean, this has all been leading to this point, in my view.
Or when Reagan killed an American citizen in Nicaragua.
You're taking it further back even than I did.
No, this goes on constantly. And Democrats are just utter hypocrites. So they complain bitterly when Republicans do it, and then complain when Republicans complain about Democrats doing it. It just makes no sense. It's a travesty. And meanwhile, presidential war powers grow, and the imperial presidency grows as well. So I see Trump as a part of that. In fact, if anything, Trump's behavior until recently had been relatively restrained compared to the Democrats. I mean, his parting words in January 2021 is that he was very proud that no wars had started under his watch. His second term is starting out a bit differently. But the point is the Democrats have nothing to complain about because they are equally at fault.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the precedents were set by Democrats like Obama, and then, I mean, we talked about Liz Cheney. The fact that she's become the face of the resistance when Dick Cheney and George W. Bush did those authorizations of use of military force that are being used today by Trump apologists to justify the
Yeah,
bombing of Iran. I mean, this is all a culmination point.
I mean,
Precedents were set by these presidents.
I mean, the worst possible outcome could see is a return to office by Liz Cheney and others of that ilk. That is the worst possible outcome that can result. I mean, that is not a solution. That is simply uh, a total non-solution that'll only make matters worse. So the working class has got to move forward. It can't go back. It can't exceed. It can't just put up with a Democratic Party restoration.
Is that in a lot of ways your biggest problem with this whole the phenomena of Trump being called a fascist? I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that you have these sort of liberal figures using this label, calling him fascist, to sort of overlook their own complicity.
Yes, I don't want to. I think the liberals are in a state of collapse, and I don't want to see them back in power. I think their collapse should be ongoing, should continue, and I don't want to see that Joe Biden's, the Kamala Harris is back in power. I mean, I think that Trump is a dictator. I think he really has clearly crossed the line into dictatorship, and that he must be removed, but it can't be removed by turning the clock back.
So, in that regard, what do you see as the path forward?
I think that what we're all waiting for is for the working class to move. That hasn't happened yet. The working class, as according to the various measures that we have, went strongly for Trump in 2024. They were discussing with the Democrats, and therefore they voted for the only realistic alternative. Now, that's obviously that just deepens the disaster. But the point is, the working class has got to strike out in its own direction. It's got to strike out in a socialist direction by acting independently of the either of the two bourgeois political parties, and constituting itself as a independent socialist force.
One thing we talked about before we started recording was I told you that I'm a bit wary of talking about the issue of quote unquote wokeness, if only because the term has been stretched to the point of meaningless by some. And I'm not saying you do that. I think your article dealt with it in a very interesting and honest way. Uh, I do think we should discuss it though, because I think you're right. I mean, there is something there when you talk about Robin DiAngelo, this person whose shtick, in my opinion, was doing workshops for corporations so that those corporations could then say, "Oh, we're anti-racist. In case you want to do a racial discrimination lawsuit on us, this is our CYA opportunity." Having DiAngelo do a workshop, and I think your point is that sort of liberal anti-racism is not enough and actually hasn't done what it has said it was going to do in creating sort of a legitimate anti-racist movement. You're saying there's other ways to do that that are more socialist oriented and are more effective.
Well, somewhere Lenin once said that even when the bourgeoisie tries to be anti-racist and winds up being racist. Robin DiAngelo, for your purpose of your listeners, is a best-selling author. Her book
White Fragility.
sold in the I don't know sold a lot of copies, and she also is a management consultant who is brought in by corporations to conduct racial awareness workshops. And in her book, White Fragility, I mean, the book is just incredibly nonsensical. It's just ridiculous from beginning to end. But in it, she tells of one incident where she was running a workshop, and everyone started jumping on one female employee, and the employee had to leave, and her coworkers came back and said to D'Angelo, this woman is having a physical breakdown. We are concerned about her health. And D'Angelo essentially said, serves her right. Now, back in my shop steward days, if management had brought a worker to the verge of a health crisis, due to the activities of some management consultant, I would have filed a grievance so fast, I would have filed a grievance immediately. That is, management consultants abusing workers in the name of anti-racism is not anti-racism. It's the exact opposite. And the only force capable of waging a true anti-racist campaign is the working class. And the working class does that on the basis of an integrated working class in which blacks and whites, stand together, and all others as well, and in which solidarity, which is impossible without stringent anti-racism, is the rule, the basic operating principle. And only socialists can do that. They can only do that by mobilizing against management, not by acting in management's behalf. So I just think that was an example of the extremely sectarian policies that were being followed at the time. And by the way, Robin DiAngelo was invited by the House Democratic Caucus, I think in 2021, 2019 or 2020, to give a talk on white fragility, with a personal introduction by Nancy Pelosi. So that amounted to a Democratic Party endorsement of her approach. So no wonder, not only did white workers, but did large numbers of Hispanic workers and even a surprising number of black workers turned away in disgust from this ideology. Woke, woke is an explosive term. No one knows what it means. It's applied willy-nilly to a whole bunch of movements. But one thing that woke was highly moralistic. And I see the whole woke movement as essentially a kind of rhetorical political strategy on the part of the chattering classes, the top 10%, the hyper-articulate, yes. The hyper-articulate top 10%, to essentially bolster its own social position. Hillary Clinton and their famous basket of deplorables. Hillary didn't just say that once. She said it many times to fund at private fundraisers in places like Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons, Beverly Hills, et cetera, et cetera. And every time she used it, the remark was greeted by laughter and applause. So this is how the working class saw this very, bourgeois, moralistic campaign as a way of reinforcing the dictatorship of the top 10%. And this is why it backfired so royally.
How could it have been structured another way? Like, how could something like anti-racism be structured in such a way to bring in the working class?
Well, I made myself very unpopular during the heyday of BLM by arguing that all lives matter is a perfectly good slogan. BLM should not reject it because the majority of victims of police violence are actually white, and that the BLM should have welcomed, people concerned with all victims. of police violence. Yes, of course, absolutely, blacks were more likely to wind up victims of police violence. There's no doubt about that.
I was
But
going to say, yeah, but go on.
but blacks are only 12% of the population, and therefore numerically the majority of victims of police violence are white or Hispanic. And that is the real problem. And BLM, out of classic, upper 10%, top 10% rhetorical strategies, decided to narrow their focus, to narrow their racial focus. And the movement wound up paying a huge price. They generated votes for Obama, for Trump. I could go on about other movements, but certainly that is an example. This very heavily moralistic, punitive approach was inherently undemocratic. It was the aim was to punish, to ostracize, to embarrass people who were hesitant to go along rather than persuading them to go along, and crafting demands that would encourage them to go along. And therefore, these forces wound up, contributing to the Democratic Party loss in 2024.
I understand that, but I guess I understand your critique, but then what is a different vision for structuring anti-racism in a different way? Like, what are the concrete ways in which we could structure a movement that will bring about a multiracial working class coalition?
It has to be a movement of by and for the multiracial working class. It's got to be a socialist movement. It's got to be a movement which links racial oppression with economic oppression, with wealth polarization, which appeals to all those white or Hispanic or even black workers who voted for Trump. I mean, we don't.
Do you think would it have to be anti-war as well?
Absolutely. I mean, who's fighting these wars? I mean, the victims, of course, are the poor. I mean, what's happening in Gaza, obviously, the devastation that's been visited upon that population is absolutely extraordinary. But the same goes for the victims in Iran, Syria, et cetera, all victims of U.S. imperial policies. And the Americans who fight those wars are working class kids. Believe me, it's not the sons and daughters of Harvard graduates who go to these countries, Iraq, for example. I mean, with that's very small number of exceptions. It's the children of the working class and children who face diminishing economic prospects at home. I mean, social conditions in the U.S. have dramatically worsened over the last 25 years.
I feel like what you're saying in some ways is we sort of have to get back to Martin Luther King in some ways, where King was tying together the three issues: racism, poverty, economic injustice, and militarism.
Yeah, I'm not an uncritical fan of King, but he was definitely heading off in an important direction. And the whole thing is to craft a working class movement that is anti-war, economically egalitarian, racial, anti-racist, and pro-democratic. With regard to the Constitution, a constitutional convention won't work because, according to Article 5, anything a constitutional convention comes up with will be subject to the same 2/3, 3/4 vote, and therefore will go nowhere. So what I argue for is not a constitutional convention, but a constituent assembly, such as in France in 1789 or in Russia in 1917. And that would be a democratically elected body, elected to according to the highest democratic standards, i.e. based on proportional representation, which would have total power to remake the Constitution, democratically remake the Constitution from top to bottom. They could make small changes, moderate changes, or could toss the whole thing out and start over from scratch, which I think the latter is actually what would happen. But that's, I think, is the only way out of the problem. In other words, the majority of Americans must democratically create a new constitution, and that process can only be led by the working class.
So there were just a few more odds and ends I wanted to get into, if you're okay with that.
Sure, of course.
One thing that I really found interesting about your article was you talked about how Trump's foreign policy is kind of a return to the past. It's back to the future. Teddy Roosevelt's big stick policies is what you bring up. And yeah, I've been saying recently that I find it confusing that people are calling Trump sort of the anti-imperialist or anti-war conservative, because I think he's really rather a proponent of sort of a return to the Monroe Doctrine and a refocusing of U.S. energies on dominating and consolidating power within its, sphere of influence. In other words, the Americas. That's where the bluster about Canada and Greenland are coming from, and all this MAGA sort of talk about Mexico and Latin America. That's my view. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but I wanted to bounce it off you.
Yeah, I think this is really important. And first of all, from 1937 starting in 1937 to 38, Hitler began preparing for total war. Now, total war is the last thing Trump wants. He's very happy with adventures like Iran because they're low cost, high yield, low cost ventures. He does not want a war economy because he knows the population wouldn't stand for it. He knows his working class base would rise up in revolt. So he likes these short-lived adventures. So, after his first term, he actually bragged about not getting involved in any war. And in his second term, he swept in as Israel was engaging in, after 10 or 11 days of warfare between Israel and Iran, and launched this bunker buster attack. And that's the kind of thing he likes. This is the kind of thing that Teddy Roosevelt liked as well. Short, punchy adventures that sort of knocked around a few third-rate powers, but kept the U.S. in general out of any major trouble. And so far, that's how I see Trump. Now, I'm not saying that Trump couldn't blunder into a larger war, most especially with China. But he doesn't want to, and he knows very well if something really bad happens in the Western Pacific, he'll be in deep trouble. He'll be the first victim of that miscalculation.
So that's what you see as being on the agenda for his foreign policy. Is there anything else you would add to that, or?
Well, I think I think the trade wars are extremely important. He's sort of declared economic warfare on the entire world. He wants to create a fortress Americana, where you got to pay a stiff entry fee in order to gain access to U.S. markets. That fortress Americana will be heavily oligarchical on the inside. Democracy will be reduced to near zero. But if you're France or Britain, you got to pay a hefty fee in order to gain access to U.S. markets. I think he doesn't give a damn about NATO. He's happy to see NATO crumble. He's happy to play footsie with various far right figures in Europe. And I think that's the game. That's how he sees playing the game for the next 3.5 years. I think that whether he gets away with it is another question, because things could get very rocky very fast.
I was also interested in the point you made about Trump's sympathy for Vladimir Putin. You say it's not because he's a Russian puppet. It's not this Russiagate narrative. You're saying it's because he's following the same trajectory or a similar trajectory to Putin. Can you speak to that a little bit more in depth for my audience?
Yeah, well, first of all, Russiagate. People may have forgotten, but Russiagate went on for 2.5 or 3 years. If you turned on CNN or MSNBC, all you heard was Russia, Russia, Russia. It just dominated the airwaves 24/7, and it was all BS. Uh, um, there's no evidence that Trump was in any way an agent of Russia. Uh, there's no logical reason to think that he should be an agent of Russia. Anyone who approached the problem in a clear-headed way, and there are very few people who did, by the way. But the Democrats thought that would be an easy way to get him out of office, and the only result was that it fed into a dangerous international atmosphere, which in February 2022 led to the outbreak of a real war between Russia and the Ukraine. But I think, Putin came in on the heels of Boris Yeltsin, a guy who was a falling down drunk. Russia saw an economic contraction that makes the U.S. contraction from 1929 to 33 seem like, a not too bad recession. I mean, male life expectancy plunged, I think, by 6 or 7 years. The country was consumed by gang warfare. Oligarchs were running the country. The country was really falling apart. And in fact, in 1998, or 1997, I believe, was late in Boris Yeltsin's term, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a best-selling book called The Grand Chessboard, in which he predicted that Russia would break up into 3 separate countries. And that did not seem to be unrealistic. But Putin came along, and through very tough authoritarian means, tamed the oligarchs, established a measure of social peace. Per capita GDP, I think, has increased more than 7-fold under Putin's reign.
Yeah, I think you also said he sort of made the oligarchs defer to what is essentially a neo-czarist state.
Yes,
yeah,
quite. I mean, I think the neo-czar label is eminently deserved. And I see Trump. I think Trump sees himself in the same role. He sees himself as a head knocker, a tough guy, a bull in a china shop who wants to bring the Democrats to heel, and even oligarchs like Elon Musk to heel.
Or even like a Jeff Bezos. Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to establish himself as the capo de tutti capi, the boss of bosses, and he so far is doing that. So in that way, I think he is quite Putin-esque, and I think that is the source of sympathy that he feels for Putin. Not that he's on the Kremlin payroll or receives secret messages in the night from the Soviet secret services, the Russian secret services, I should say. But I think it's a sympathy that he sees himself in similar economic terms, similar political terms.
But it's interesting because you say he's not likely to get the same outcomes as Putin, where, Russia per capita GDP rose more than 7-fold. You're saying if Trump's looking for that, he probably isn't going to get it because of the tariffs. He's going to get the opposite.
Per capita GDP is not going to rise 7-fold in the U.S. That I will stake my life on. I think that we're heading into a recession. I think that tariffs will have a devastating economic effect. Paul Krugman has been pointing out that they are actually several, much more severe than the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1931, which played a major role in plunging the world into and taking a serious recession and turning it into a global depression. And I think that Trump's tariffs will have the same effect. I think that the Trump is sending the financial markets into orbit. He himself is playing really heavily in the crypto game. He's putting the strength of the U.S. Treasury behind crypto with this insane Genius Act. And I just see the makings of a tremendous disaster, which will outstrip even 2008, and will have a political dimension which is outstrips that of 2008 as well.
I want to bring this full circle back to the sort of core of your article, why Trump is not a fascist and why it matters. I feel like one of the core arguments you're making is that the sort of conditions from which fascism arose aren't there now. The sort of capitalist class doesn't need fascism to achieve their ends. Am I reading you correctly there, or?
Well, I'm not saying that fascism is not a possibility.
Well, no, yeah, I think you've
Yeah,
said elsewhere that it can very much become we're on the road. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the historical parallel I have in mind is Hungary in 1944. It was under Admiral Miklos Horthy, who was an old style conservative. He literally styled himself a moderate anti-Semite. He wanted to kick out the Jews, but do it at a moderate tempo. And in early 1944, I think it was in June, he was essentially overthrown by real fascists who, in the ensuing months, shipped off 900,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. And so I see Trump as much closer to Horthy, and I think that the real fascists are still waiting in the wings. In fact, I really wonder if Elon Musk's America Party. I mean, I have no idea where it'll go, what'll happen to it. I mean, Musk is kind of a goofy guy, so I have no idea if what he's up to will come to anything. But I wonder if that couldn't be the seeds of a real fascist movement, a fascist movement which overthrows Trump and really imposes a real fascist reign of terror, which will be, of course, absolutely catastrophic.
Maybe I was misreading them, because while reading the article, I felt like what you were saying is that there sort of needs to be a revolutionary upsurge in order for fascism to really take place. Am I getting that correct, or?
Well, I think if Trump gets himself in trouble, as I'm sure he will, there will be a revolutionary upsurge. I mean, if the economy collapses, if the financial markets blow up, if crypto turns into a real disaster, if there's a war with China, if things go really, really seriously awry, I think you will see deep unrest in this country. We've already got a taste of it in Los Angeles, and those were very impressive demonstrations. And I think as the migrant roundup intensifies, and how many hundreds of millions are allocated for the migrant roundups and the big beautiful bill, I think that we'll see a popular response, a increasingly working class response. But if things turn south in other ways, then we'll see even more of an explosion. And I think that's when the crunch will really be upon us, and a time when you can see the emergence of real fascist forces and the emergence of real revolutionary socialist forces. I think America is we're heading into the storms. I think that the process is just beginning, but it's going to be very intense. I'm quite confident in making that prediction.
I wanted to ask as well, if I have listeners that are, I assume at least some listeners are going to close their ears and say, "Oh, I don't want to hear it." The January 6th, he's a fascist. What would you say to listeners that are closing themselves off to your analysis, and why do you think it is important that we differentiate between conservative authoritarians and fascists?
Because it's like differentiating between stage 1 cancer and stage 4. And they have they merit their different diagnoses, and they merit different treatments. And if you're a doctor, you got to be very very cool and analytical as to the disease you're diagnosing. You can't be carried away by emotions. You can't say, "Oh my God, this guy is so sick." No, it's just terrible, horrible, horrible. What am I going to do? You got to be, you got to be calm and collected. So we got to be very precise with our diagnosis, but and be very clear about the dynamics that are being unleashed. And one of the dynamics is that we are heading into these storms, and the storms could have revolutionary consequences. America was once a model of stability, but those days are gone, and we are entering into a period of deepening destabilization.
Do you think at the core we're going to be facing two sort of as time goes on, we're almost going to be facing two separate visions of revolution, one a sort of fascist revolution and one a socialist revolution?
Well, let me make very clear, yes, that is certainly true, and that was the case in Germany in 1933. I mean, Hitler styled his regime a national revolution, and the R word was frequently on Nazi lips. I don't see, and that's not how I see a socialist revolution by any means. I mean, first of all, I think that a constituent assembly, which I think is should be a prime demand of a socialist movement. I see that as an attempt to create a real democracy, and to do so in a way which is orderly. Now, when I say orderly, I don't mean following legalistic procedures. I mean that workers, striking, demonstrating, etc., but saying what they want is they want a democratic remodeling of U.S. society in which they want to be prime participants. And we don't know how far that remodeling will go, but certainly workers should demand a workers' democracy, a democracy geared to the needs of people like themselves, not the Wall Street zillionaires. And so, I mean, so I don't want to say I'm not going to predict how this process will play out, but I certainly want to see this to be organized, concerted, and deliberate. I don't, I'm not a violence freak. I don't want to see, I don't believe in violence for the sake of violence by any means. I absolutely abhor violence, but I think that the working class must act in a way which is deliberate, concerted, and powerful.
In closing, what do you want my listeners to get out of this conversation? Because we've gone in a number of different directions, and I feel like there's multiple points we've made. But what's the one? I guess what's the core that you want my listeners to understand?
That America is profoundly unstable, and it's heading into a stormy period, and that stormy period will be is unlike this country's ever seen before. The 238-year-old republic is collapsing. A new republic must be erected in its place, and that involves a revolution. And that process is going to be quite sweeping. And I am absolutely confident that about the approaching storms. We're heading into a period of a profound shakeup, deep instability.
I feel like what you're saying is that Trump is almost like the beginning,
Yes.
not the end, and that in a way he could be the trigger for the bigger storm.
I quite agree. That's exactly my point. He is just the start of the process. The process is a long ways to go, and it will go very deep.
I want to thank you again, Daniel Lazare, for coming on Parallax Views. How can my listeners keep up with your work?
Well, I write for Permanent Revolution, permanent-revolution.org. I've got a Substack column going. I've got a blog at daniellazare.com. And I write occasionally for other sites like the Democratic Constitution blog, and a few others.
Thank you so much for coming on Parallax Views.
Thank you for having me.
This edition of Parallax Views brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to
Galen, Matt,
Gunnar, Mark,
Simon,
Alexander, Catherine,
G,
Tilo, Emilia,
Jeremy,
Jeff,
WV,
John,
Bert,
Brian, Elliot,
Darko,
Michael, Brace,
James,
Nick,
Mark M, Mersham,
Galen,
Gareth,
Arlen, Bo,
Christopher, Michael,
Gigadelic Media,
Will,
Chance, Chase,
JC,
Dan,
Big Bob, David H, Y, Kellerman, Saded 13, Kathleen,
David,
Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch,
Gary,
Max,
Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho,
Brian,
Nobody, Thomas, and Dano.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. As always, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.